And I never understood why, and then just over the last few years I actually have become to understand why he did.
What was your early musical influences?
Well, all of the people, really, I guess, that my dad used to listen to, which was the jazz from the period, which would go back as far as like Django, Charlie Christian, who was with Benny Goodman, right the way through Miles. You know.
I understand at a real early age you had a major affinity with record player, like at 2 or 3 you were just...
Well, I was absolutely enthralled with music. Music was everything. I mean, I had no desire whatsoever to play an instrument. I wasn't really interested in instruments, I was just interested in music.
Were you formally trained?
No. In fact, most of the things I learned in the beginning anyway. You know, since then I've just worked on my own, but most of the things I learned in the beginning were from my father.
What was your schooling like?
Regular schooling, you mean? Oh, pretty imbecilic, you know, the usual, like, secondary modern schools, they were called in England at that time. No, you know, I left school when I was 14 or 15 and got a job in a bike shop, and then I got a job making baskets. Did a lot of day jobs.
I understand that when you were young you wanted to be a saxophone player.
Yeah, well, actually, after I'd been listening to music for a long time, when I got to be about 10 or 11, I really wanted to. I was really interested in saxophone. I just loved the breathing thing. You know, it just seemed so alive. It seemed you could do more with it than a voice, but yet it had that connection, like a vocal thing.
Why didn't you pursue that?
Well, at the time, saxophones were very expensive things to buy. You know. So my dad got, we had an uncle who played guitar, and my father got a guitar from him and just left it lying around. I just stand in front of the mirror, and you know, I had no real interest in it at all. And he just left it there, and I just noodled on it from time to time. Carried on listening to music, but still had no real desire to play anything. And then I guess over a period of time, I realized I was playing a few chords on it or whatever, and then my dad took over because he knew all the notes on guitar, you know, being the musician that he was. He knew where all the notes were, how it was tuned, the whole thing. So as soon as he saw any interest in it, he started trying to help me out. But I was very stubborn, and I didn't really like the help. Although I needed it, I wanted to, you know, like that thing, I want to do it on my own.
You mentioned Charlie Christian. Did you memorize Charlie Christian solos by any chance? Or
I learned a few Charlie Christian solos from the albums that he was on, but that was one of the things that I realized was that I wasn't really learning anything from copying anything. And I realized that I needed to figure out what the person, you know, what they were thinking or how they were going about it. It was more important than actually what they played from a copying point of view. If I copied something and I was to do 2 solos on the same piece of music, I realized that when I played the one off the, you know, that I copied, that was fine, but when I came to play my own, it was nowhere. So I realized really in the beginning that I needed to find out a way to use whatever I had to and play the kind of music that I wanted to play, and I've just been struggling with it ever since.
Your guitar always sounds as if you're blowing it, like you're not plucking it. Was that intentional?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't like guitar very much. I mean, I love to hear other people play it. I don't mean I don't like the instrument, period. It's just that for me...
In 1970, then, you started playing with the Glenn South Band, right?
Yeah.
And what was that like? What kind of band?
It was basically like a top 40 band. You know, they just played... He played in... he had a dance band, you know, they played waltzes, foxtrots, quick steps, all the dance things. And then a couple of nights a week they played top 40 stuff. And I think he liked my playing and just tried to get me into the band. And I was really interested in doing that because I was working during the day, and I thought it'd be an opportunity to practice during the day, you know, so I could do the gig with the band and then just like kind of do some practicing, you know.
And then I guess your first recording contract was with a group, Tempest, that originally contained Paul Williams, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't my record, but recording contract, but yeah, that was the first band that I'd like to think I did anything with. Yeah.
How do you feel about that first recording?
I think it was all right. You have to take them for what they were. You know, some albums, if they're okay when they were done, that's the best you could do. But if something happens where you do an album under great duress, you know, where everything's completely wrong, and like I did an album for CTI and the whole band was completely ripped off, like the whole thing. That is never valid to me, you know, because it wasn't even valid at the time, so it most certainly isn't now. But the Tempest album, you know, I'd probably cringe if I heard it, but that was what it was.
I understand that after that you had some lean years, and you owe a lot to Ray Wally and Brian Blaine.
Yeah, Brian Blaine was a guy who worked for the Musicians Union, and he really helped me out a lot. That guy, he tried to, you know, hook me up with various musicians like in London. And Ray Wally was probably, without him I would have never been able to make the move from that top 40 band to move to London. He just had a room where I could stay, and he said, you know, if you want to do that, it's there. So about 6 months after he told me that, I decided that I wanted to get out of the top 40 thing and try it. So I called him up and he remembered me, and he said, sure, come on. So that's how it started.
Then in '75 you got with Soft Machine. That was a band that used a lot of different time signatures and stuff. Was it a learning process for you?
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed working with that band. They were all great, you know, musicians. The drummer in the band at the time, John Marshall, I played with him with different people. I used to work with a piano player, an English piano player, jazz piano player. He was a really wonderful musician. His name was Pat Smythe. He died a few years ago, but he used to have John play in his band, and so I met John through that, and I think John told the band, you know, Soft Machine. And then they invited me out to do some guest shows with that band. And then after we'd done those, they asked me if I'd like to join the band, so I said, yeah, it was great. You know, I really enjoyed working with it.
And the album Bundles has a tune on it. It's called Hazard Profile. I remember, it has a very long solo on it. Is that like the longest of yours to date?
I don't know. I'm scared to listen to it, but that's a long time ago. I don't know. I think it was pretty long. I remember I tried afterwards. I hated the solo. I remember, and I tried to overdub one, and it was worse, so I just left it. I had to leave it as it was, you know.
You went on to work with Tony Williams, and it was his new Lifetime. You did an album, $1 Million Legs.
Yeah.
Any recollections of that?
Yeah, it was wonderful. You know, apart from some of the financial hazards, it was a wonderful experience. I mean, obviously, such an amazing musician. I learned such a lot from him. I know all the guys in the band. That's how I got to meet Alan Pasqua, who's still one of my favorite musicians on the planet. You know, so
keyboard.
It was great, yeah.
And you also got to work with some great bands, Gong, Jean LaPunny, and Billy Bruford.
Yeah.
How did all that come about? Just popping in?
Well, Bill, because Bill used to, I guess Bill used to hang out sometimes at some of the local jazz gigs in London. I think maybe he saw us doing that, I'm not exactly sure. And then, you know, we made contact, and I guess that thing started, you know. And then he was doing a solo album, and after that, I guess he was involved with UK. And he suggested to them if they need a guitar player, they might, you know, maybe ask me, so.
You worked with Eddie Jobson and that,
yeah.
and did I read this correct, that you and Bruford were actually dismissed from the band UK?
Yeah, we were fired.
Why was that?
We were fired by the management, but basically it wasn't the management. I think it was, I saw that band essentially as being Eddie's band, because he was the most involved in the writing of it. You know, and it really was his thing, I think. You know, I don't know, it was kind of getting out. It wouldn't have worked. I mean, if Bill, I'm sure Bill would have left on his own able, but I was sure wouldn't have been able to take it anymore. So it was like being fired was pretty okay, you know. But they were great guys, you know. I really like all of the guys, good, you know, great musicians. And I enjoyed it at the time. Well, I mean, I enjoyed making the record, but doing the gigs was hell. But other than that, you know.
And in 1980, you started a trio called False Alarm with Gary Husband and Paul Carmichael.
Paul Carmichael, yeah.
Right? Was it time for you to become a leader?
Well, during the time, I'd always worked, like basically most of my life worked, well, after I moved to London, I'd just been another guy in someone else's band, just a sideman. So I had a backlog of material that I'd been working on that I wanted to try and play with different people. And then I met Gary Husband, because all these guys, you know, the musicians have been saying, hey, you got to listen to this drummer from Leeds, like he's unbelievable. And I had an opportunity to play with Gary, and it was like really special, and the guy's really an unbelievable musician. I really liked working with him, and he really probably understood more what I wanted than I could understand what he was really wanting, but it was a really great beginning of a really good kind of relationship, and we just tried to get this band off of the road, and we couldn't. I had a friend who worked at Virgin Records, and he gave us some free studio time, a guy called Nicholas Powell, and we did some tracks, and we kind of, in fact, in the end, we finished doing the whole album on this little boat on a canal in London.
Oh, was it called the barge?
Yeah, the barge, yeah.
Was it really a barge?
Yeah, it was just a little floating barge. And when the boats would go by, the whole studio would go. It was great. But we tried to give the album away, and we couldn't. We sent tapes to like 5 major labels in England, and nobody was interested in it free. We didn't want anything. We just said, can you put this album out? And they said no.
Oh.
So that was essentially why I tried to get over to the States.
So you was released independently then by yourself?
Well, I had the tape, you know, because we'd recorded the album in a couple of days on this boat, and then I paid for the mixing by selling like the last 2 guitars that I had.
Oh no.
And we mixed side 1 in one evening from 8 o'clock till 6 in the morning, and then side 2 the same, you know, 8 till 6 the following day. And at the end of it all, I had the album, but nobody interested in it, so it was just a tape. But when we came to the States, and the people seemed to be much more receptive, then we decided to try and press them up on our own. And we did. And we just started selling them at the gigs. That's kind of how it all started. It hasn't gone very far from then, but...
I understand Sharon Soudal, is that the person that brought you over and brought you for the first Roxy gigs?
She was great. We couldn't have done it without her.
Now when you came to the Roxy, did the Americans know you?
Yeah, we were amazed. I mean, the first place we played actually was in San Francisco. There was a guy, Mike Varney, who writes the column for that Guitar Player magazine. So he taught the guys at the Keystone, who owned us 3 Keystone clubs. There was Keystone Berkeley, Keystone Corner, and Keystone Palo Alto, into giving us a gig. And we couldn't believe it. You know, we went from a pub in London with 13 people in there to playing in this place. Well, it was only like a 500-seat club, but it was packed. So it was like a shock. Then we went to Roxy, it was the same thing. The guy who owned the clubs up in San Francisco called the guy at the Roxy and said, take a chance, man, and the same thing happened. So we just got lucky, I guess.
I understand that Edward Van Halen got involved in your career around that time.
Yeah, he's a really great guy, man, and he's got a big heart, and he really helped us out, you know, but it just wasn't to be, you know, the situation that came from it just wasn't as much as, you know, I would have liked it to happen, and I'm sure Edward wanted it to happen, you know, but there was too many problems with the whole thing. You know, the record company, I think the record company were only interested in it because of him. And then they wanted me to get rid of the guys in the band and start a new band, you know, basically stop doing, I saw it as being, they wanted me to stop doing what I was doing, which seemed pointless. Why get a deal with a major label if they don't want you to do what you do? Yeah. Might as well stay where you are, you know. So,
then you worked with Ted Templeton, right? Was that
Ted Templeton, yeah.
Next. What was that like?
Well, that was part of the whole thing. He was, obviously, he's a great producer, but we just didn't see eye to eye.
You did some things with CTI, you mentioned before, the Velvet Darkness album.
Yeah, that was a big rip-off, the big disaster in my whole life, and it haunts me to this day. You know, the guy basically said I could record with whoever I wanted to, and I got Alan Pasqua, Alfonso Johnson, you know, and Michael Walden, and I thought, boy, this is going to be great. But we were rehearsing in the studio, and they just recorded the rehearsing. We never actually got to record the tracks. They just recorded the rehearsals, and that was it. When we said, like, isn't it time we did those tracks again, you know? No, that was it. So it was a real disaster album then, and it's an even bigger disaster now, because the new album, Secrets, or the last album, was on Enigma, which we bought by Capitol, and then the album is no longer available. But, of course, you can find the old CTI album on Sony CBS, which is, it makes me want to give it, just quit on the spot. I mean, it's such a, how do you deal with that?
We need to take a break, and we'll be back in a second with more from Allan Holdsworth. Here, and we're back with Allan Holdsworth. Let's talk about the Metal Fatigue album. Seems like we've done this once.
Yeah.
It album seemed to distinguish you as a force to be reckoned with, but, you know, how was it accepted by the fans as far as you were concerned?
Well, I think it was pretty good, because Enigma was a new, well, Enigma was in the, going in the, you know, it was a particularly good period for us with them, because they did a lot of promotion, and maybe we were later on we became a small fish in a, you know, in a big pond. But the interesting thing about that album was that that album was actually a demo for Warner Brothers after Road Games. When we were dropped from Road Games, we did Metal Fatigue, and it was a demo for Warner Brothers, and they didn't like it. So we gave it to Enigma, you know, happily, to have. And my relationship with Enigma, you know, has been really good. They just let me do what I want, so I'm a happy guy.
There was something great. There were some amazing tunes in there. I always thought that Metal Fatigue, if it could have got the airplay, could have been a great FM crossover hit. And there was a Devil Take the Hindmost. All I can say about that is, whew. And then the tune I was really interested in is the Un-Merry-Go-Round. Where'd that come from?
Well, it was kind of... basically, I wrote that for my dad, you know, because my dad died during that year, you know, the year that we was doing that album, and he used to always have these, he was a really great artist, you know, and he used to draw these, this merry-go-round with all these famous English politicians on, like you'd have like Ronald Reagan and all these guys on there, and he'd have them with their slogans, you know, and he used to call it the Un-Merry-Go-Round. So I got the title from him, you know.
The solo in there, which by the way is Phil Keaggy's all-time favorite electric guitar solo, the soprano, which is quite a compliment itself, the soprano sax solo that you sort of do. Where's that coming from? I mean, you know, what's the inspiration? It actually sounds nearly exactly like a soprano.
For a period of time, I guess I go through these periods that change, you know, and I was really trying to get like that soprano kind of tone. And I guess it was about as close as I got, and I couldn't get any closer, so I gave up. I started on something else.
Well, it's a brilliant solo. In '85, you got into syntax. Yeah. Right? And I'm not that familiar with it, but I know it doesn't work from pitch to voltage. No. It works how?
It works on like a mechanical contact, just like a keyboard. So it's extremely accurate, you know, and it was the only one for me that worked. You know, I just really wanted to accurately control synthesizers. I didn't want to have to deal with a glitch guitar, to have like a guitar sound with a glitching sound underneath. You know, I had no desire to do that at all. I just wanted something where I could play synthesizers and, you know, program my own sounds and just get into that world, you know, because it was also freed me from the guitar, and I started using the syntax with a breath controller. And I actually was getting more like kind of pleasure out of playing that than from the guitar. It kind of freed me. I kind of escaped from the guitar a little, which I liked. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't really able to get any real assistance from, you know, I guess nobody else liked it but me. You know, I think there's a couple other guys out there really love it, you know, but
how's the neck spacing on it?
The fret spacing is linear. You know, it does get smaller, but not like the same as guitar. And that was one of the problems I had, is I wanted them to make a smaller neck, but it wasn't going to happen.
And did you sample all your sounds for that yourself?
No, I never really used sampling. I thought I was going to do that in the beginning, but I just used synthesis. I never really used any samples. I just used mostly Oberheim stuff because I just really love it.
Is that what you use on Adavacron?
Yeah.
Oberheims and stuff? Cool. You always did great tune on it too. No, it's on Adavacron. You got to work with Tony Williams again. And
Yeah.
Looking Glass.
Yeah.
Great music on that album. Non-brewed condiment, funnels with an amazing solo. What synthesizers did you incorporate now, basically? Just Oberheims, is that?
Well, the solo on Funnels is a guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I only played guitar on that track.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, what in general, was that just all Oberheims on that?
Yeah, mostly. I had a couple of DX modules, but mostly everything I've done on all of the albums is Oberheim. I was an Oberheim nut. You know.
Did you ever travel with it then? Sometime?
Yeah, we took it on the road a while, took it to Japan a few times. But it just became too much of a liability because of the... I had 4 consoles and only one of them works at the moment, so it gets a bit scary when you go up there, you don't know if it's going to work. So.
Yeah, you did for Intima in 1989, the album Secrets, right?
Yep.
What was the inspiration there?
Well, it's just the same. You know, I just keep trying to learn, you know, just learn more about music and just continue to write tunes and play them, you know. And I enjoyed that album, you know. I think that was my favorite album so far, just because it's the last one. You know.
Compositionally, do you hear, you know, compositions like, you know, from start to finish? Do you start finding chords that you... How do you take certain approaches? What is your approach basically to composition? Do you hear complete entities or do you hear parts?
No, I usually hear parts. You know, if I'm not with an instrument, then I'll have an idea or something. But I usually come across them by improvising. You know, I'll start improvising with chords or whatever. Then I'll find something that I like, and then I just work on it, try and modulate it. You know. I like to experiment with it. I like to modulate, you know, through a lot of different keys. So.
You seem to have a really different approach to, you know, the scalar relation between chords. Like most guitar players, sometimes it's linear in the fact that it's very scalar, but your jumps are extremely large.
They're just the same notes, they're just in a different order.
And same thing with chords, basically. Your chords are, you know, we watched it tonight, I didn't see one, I will call it normal guitar chord all night. Is that on purpose?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your instruments, basically. What was your first guitar then?
First guitar was this old, like an old, it was kind of like a classical guitar, but it did have steel strings on it. And then after that, my dad got me an F-hole guitar, which is a guitar I had for a year or so, you know. It was a Hofner. And then I put a pickup on it, and this friend of my dad's who was into amplifiers, building amplifiers, just started getting interested in amplifiers then. He built that, and then I saw this guy who loaned me the Fender Stratocaster, which I fell in love with. So I tried this Fender Strat, and then my dad got it, you know, like signed for it, so I could make the payments on it. And then about 2 months later, I played an SG, and that was it from then on. You know, I was completely in love with this SG. So I got this SG Standard, then I later on traded it for an SG Custom. And I basically stayed with that guitar right the way through until Tony Williams.
Did you ever try any semi-hollow bodies like the 335
yeah, I
or
did.
175?
I had a period of that with a short one when I was working with Tempest, because Paul Williams, the singer, he had a 335, and I tried it and I really liked it. And then it started me off on this hollow thing. So I played a 175 for a while. I even played like some tunes with Tempest on a 175, which is kind of funny.
You did a lot of things with light wood, and the norm was to have a heavy Les Paul or something for sustain, but you kind of turned that around, having some guitars built with basswood and some other things.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if you make a guitar from a really heavy wood with a brass bridge and all that stuff, what you get is you get a lot of sustain but no sound, you know, no tone, because it's like a plank. And there's no response in the instrument because it's already at maximum. And I like the string to have a relationship with the wood, and you can get like dynamics out of it. One of the things that I found with a real heavy guitar was when it was plugged into an amp was no matter how hard or soft you hit the string, the volume is always almost the same. Whereas if you use like a lighter wood or something, it just seems more responsive. You know, you can play a note softer and it's soft, and harder and it's a little harder. You can just shape it more. So that was why I started experimenting with that. But I could never get it real consistent. And then I discovered the Steinberger, and that kind of turned my whole life around.
And before we get into that, you went through a period with Charvel, Strats, and things, and you
That's
get
right.
your chisel period. Explain to us what that was.
Well, it was just basically, before I met Grover Jackson, it was an unbelievable guy, and he really helped us out a lot in the beginning with IOU, you know. Just when I first came to the States, I didn't have a guitar or anything, and he gave me like 3 or 4 really great guitars. And basically the chisel thing was just taking an old Strat and chiseling a hole so you could put a humbucker on it. It was before you could get humbuckers on Strats, you know. And then like I said, I met Grover, and he made those guitars for us. Those were some of the best guitars. I had a red one that he made that was actually one of the best guitars I ever owned.
What was the neck configuration? Was it maple and
It was maple with an ebony fingerboard and a basswood body.
And Seymour Duncan?
Seymour Duncan.
59, what is it, 59?
It was
JB.
essentially a 59, yeah.
Yeah, great sounding guitars. Then you got into Steinberger recently. How did that come about?
Well, this guy kept saying, hey, have you checked out those little plastic things? You know, and I go, I don't think I'm going to like that. And a friend of mine just took me up to the booth on one of those NAMM shows, and I played one, and I just fell in love with it. I couldn't believe it. It was totally unexpected, and turned me inside out with the guitar. You know, it was so consistent. It had the right neck width. You know, everything about it was great. And now when I go back to play a wood guitar, they feel like kind of dinosaur-like. I think it was the only significant thing that anybody did with electric guitar for like 20 years.
What sort of pickup is on there?
It's the same one.
The same
It's a
thing?
Seymour Duncan.
How about with string gauge? What sort of string gauge do you use?
Well, I do vary those, but for the last, I use real thin strings. It's 8.
8 on.
I usually go from anywhere between a 10 and an 8. I've used 10s, 9s, but at the moment I'm using 8s.
What's the low E?
36.
37 is like. And what do you practice when you practice them now?
Well, I usually have a lot of things that I've worked out away from the guitar. You know, I work a lot of stuff out off of the guitar, and then when I get some time, when I'm not feeling too lazy or like riding my bike or drinking beer, then I'll practice a little.
What do you feel your strengths are?
I don't know if I have any, you know.
How about your weaknesses?
Everything.
Tell us about your vibrato technique.
Well, it's just more or less like a classical guitar from a violin. I bend the string linearly along its length, like this way, as opposed to this way. Although I do use this motion for on the low strings. But on the high strings, I just use, because you can stretch the string more, and I think it gives more inflection in the sound. You know, I like it more than the bend, because the bend is always sharp. But when you grab the string and bend it this way, you can make it flat. You know, it's more expressive, I think.
How about your whammy bar approach?
Well, I gave up using it just because everybody else does. You know.